let's just jump right into it. In this explainer, we're taking a look at the incredibly complex geopolitical chessboard of the Middle East right now. But we're not doing a top-down view. No, we're actually going to look at this from the perspective of an everyday Lebanese citizen who's literally caught in a massive geopolitical vice. We're going to map out this whole web of logistical warfare, impossible diplomatic demands, and really dangerous historical traps. So think about this for a second. What would you do if you woke up to news that a major, internationally brokered peace deal is on the horizon? Sounds like a total relief, right? But what if the fine print of that supposed peace deal actually threatened to trigger a civil war right in your own backyard? Well, that's exactly the impossible dilemma facing Lebanon today. And to understand how we got here, we really need to dig into what's actually on the table. Part 1. The illusion of peace. On the surface, this recent Israel-Lebanon withdrawal agreement is packaged as this big diplomatic breakthrough to end all the fighting. But when you really look at the details, it's not a clean withdrawal at all. Israel actually demands to keep control of critical outposts, including the highly strategic Beaufort Castle. Plus, their military would stay positioned both south and north of the Litani River. And here's the massive catch. There's no complete withdrawal until Hezbollah is entirely disarmed. On top of that, Lebanese citizens are reportedly blocked from returning to their homes in the south. So, essentially, this deal allows foreign forces to strike inside Lebanon if they even suspect militant activity. It makes peace completely conditional on a fractured Lebanon. Part 2. The Army under tutelage. To enforce this supposed peace, there's a really controversial proposal floating around. The idea is that U.S. military officers would actually embed themselves within the Lebanese armed forces, training and directing a specialized division. And the Lebanese president pushed back hard against this. He recognized it as an attempt to create an army within an army. And if you live in Lebanon, this immediately sets off alarm bells, bringing up some incredibly dark historical parallels to a proxy force known as the South Lebanon Army, or the SLA. To put that in perspective, back in 1976, the SLA was formed with direct Israeli backing to fight proxy battles down in the south. But look at how that played out in the year 2000. When Israel abruptly withdrew from Lebanon without even coordinating with their proxy, the SLA was just left entirely surrounded. I mean, the force collapsed literally overnight. Its members had to either flee the country or surrender to Hezbollah. So that historical precedent shows that foreign-backed proxy forces are often used and then totally abandoned. And trust me, that memory is still very fresh for the Lebanese people. Part 3. The Specter of War. When we break down the factions involved here, the dynamic gets explosive really fast. You've got the Lebanese Army, basically pressured by U.S. and Israeli influence to actively disarm Hezbollah. Then you have Hezbollah, who is absolutely refusing disarmament and viewing the whole deal as completely void. And finally, you have the Israeli forces just waiting on the sidelines, tying their own withdrawal to the Lebanese basically fighting each other. Honestly, the strategy looks perfectly designed to trigger a fratricidal civil war, and that risks the exact same kind of geographic and demographic destruction we've seen in places like Gaza, where homes are just erased and populations are permanently displaced. We really have to pause on this realization from the Lebanese leadership. The Lebanese president openly stated that Israel wants to make an army within the army. Recognizing that allowing foreign officers into their sovereign command rooms completely strips them of their independence is huge. Imagine being a Lebanese citizen and watching your own national defense force being molded into someone else's geopolitical tool.
Part 4. The Iranian logistical trap.
Okay, now we need to zoom out a bit to the broader regional chessboard to really understand why Lebanon is being squeezed so tightly. Let's kick this off with a pretty surprising number: 20%. Back during his regional diplomacy, Donald Trump made the staggering demand that Gulf states needed to pay a 20% protection tax from their national income in exchange for U.S. defense against Iran. But, as we'll see, that promised defense has proven pretty ineffective at keeping crucial waterways open. Because despite the massive presence of the U.S. Fifth Fleet, Iran has absolutely maintained a chokehold on global maritime trade. It goes like this. When ships try to cross the Strait of Hormuz without permission from the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, Iran targets them with drones. Then, the U.S. strikes Iranian drone bases. Iran retaliates against U.S. bases in the Gulf, and the cycle just spins on. But through this kind of strategic patience, Iran effectively retains control over who gets to pass through this absolutely vital global artery.
And this ties right into Iran's main strategy against Israel. See, Iran isn't actually looking for a direct apocalyptic nuclear war. Instead, their strategy is a logistical trap designed to totally invalidate Israel. They're going for slow economic asphyxiation. Remember, Israel is a small country, and it relies heavily on just 3 major economic poles and a few key ports, especially Haifa. So by slowly tightening the noose around maritime logistics and threatening these hubs with conventional missiles, Iran aims to basically cripple the Israeli economy without ever crossing that nuclear threshold.
Which brings us to a massive, yet kind of quiet vulnerability: the brain drain. Israel's economy is incredibly dependent on human capital, specifically intellectual capital and their tech sector. But this constant state of war, the intense economic pressure, and all these logistical threats are causing highly skilled tech engineers and professionals to just leave for places like New York or Europe. And if a knowledge-based economy loses its top minds, the whole foundation starts to crumble.
Part 5. The Masada Complex. So let's look at the most terrifying potential outcome of all this economic asphyxiation. What actually happens when a nation feels like it's being slowly choked to death? Well, it triggers something called the Masada trap, or Masada logic. This goes all the way back to 70 AD during the Roman siege of Jerusalem. The zealot defenders inside the Masada fortress actually burned their own food reserves to force a fight to the death. They chose absolute destruction over surrender. And the analysis suggests that certain elements within Netanyahu's current government operate on that exact same messianic logic today. They are willing to trigger a completely apocalyptic, irrational scenario if they feel totally cornered. And this right here is the ultimate risk. If Iran's logistical trap actually pushes Israel to the brink of demographic and economic collapse, if the ports completely stop working and the tech sector just flees, an Israel driven by Masada logic won't just quietly fade away. The real fear is that they would lash out. They could potentially use their German-supplied Dolphin submarines to launch tactical nuclear weapons at Iran, which would trigger a totally catastrophic regional fallout. Now, with stakes literally that high, you'd think diplomacy would be incredibly careful and calculated, right? Well, instead, we actually saw a stunning collapse of secret de-escalation talks that were held in Pakistan. You had figures like J.D. Vance and Jared Kushner hoping to score a diplomatic win with the Iranian representative Abbas Araghchi, but the whole effort was completely derailed by impulsive American political posturing. Yeah, the talks collapsed almost instantly because Donald Trump prematurely claimed the deal was done and actually publicly threatened to kidnap the Iranian delegation if they didn't comply. And, unsurprisingly, threatening to abduct diplomats doesn't exactly work out well. The Iranian delegation completely refused to engage any further and just walked right away from the table. It really proved that the U.S. administration currently lacks the leverage, or frankly the tact, to force an end to this conflict.
Part 6. The Citizens' Dilemma. Okay, after looking at all these grand, terrifying geopolitical schemes, we really need to zoom back down to the streets of Lebanon. Let's go back to that citizen we talked about at the very beginning. What are your actual choices here? Option 1, you support the U.S. brokered deal and stand with a push to forcefully disarm Hezbollah. But, as we've already seen, going down that path likely means igniting a super bloody civil war, turning your own cities into battlegrounds, and risking a total repeat of the doomed history of the proxy South Lebanon army.
Then there's option 2. You completely reject the deal and stand with Hezbollah and Iran to repel that foreign influence. But choosing this path means inviting even further destruction of your own geographic and demographic reality. It means enduring relentless airstrikes, seeing villages flattened, and basically being used as a pawn in Iran's long-term logistical war of attrition against Israel. Or, I guess there's option 3, standing completely alone with the Lebanese state to try and protect your sovereignty from all sides. But how are you supposed to do that when your own national army is actively being carved up and turned into a proxy force by foreign powers who are literally embedding their own officers into your ranks? It's just an absolutely agonizing reality. The grand strategies of superpowers and regional heavyweights are always ultimately paid for by the people on the ground. So we're going to leave you with this final, truly impossible dilemma to reflect on. Caught right in the crossfire of apocalyptic Masada logic and a brutal logistical war. Which impossible choice would you make? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the world around you.